Have you ever wondered why, despite all technological advances, all the freedom of information, and all the supposed individual empowerment we celebrate today, you often feel as if you are following a script you didn't write? Perhaps you've noticed that strange feeling at the end of a workday when you realize you've spent hours reacting to stimuli instead of acting with purpose. Or maybe you've experienced that unsettling moment when, while talking with friends, you notice that all of you are repeating the same phrases, the same opinions, as if they were original, but they actually seem to have been implanted in your minds. This feeling that something is operating behind the scenes of your consciousness is not paranoia. It's an accurate intuition about a disturbing reality of our time. We are living in an era where the reprogramming of humanity is not just a theoretical possibility, but an ongoing project happening on multiple fronts simultaneously. And what's most disturbing is that many of us are participating in this process voluntarily, offering not only our data, but our very capacity for self-determination, often without understanding the deep implications of this surrender. To understand what is happening, we must first recognize that human manipulation is not a new phenomenon. Since the earliest agricultural empires, elites have developed sophisticated methods to direct the behavior of the masses. The Code of Hammurabi was not just a set of laws, but a social technology designed to shape how people thought about justice, property, and their place in the social hierarchy. The elaborate rituals in the pyramids of ancient Egypt were not merely expressions of religious faith, but carefully designed mechanisms to reinforce a worldview that legitimized pharaonic power. And when medieval priests controlled access to knowledge through texts written in Latin, they were not simply preserving information, they were exercising control over which ideas could circulate and how they would be interpreted. What makes our historical moment different is not the existence of manipulation, but the convergence of technologies and methodologies that make this manipulation exponentially more precise, more personalized, more pervasive, and more invisible than anything our ancestors ever faced. We are witnessing the emergence of an infrastructure of influence that not only shapes our external behaviors, but reconfigures our very subjectivity, altering how we experience the world and ourselves. The first epicenter of this reprogramming is what we can call the attention economy. While previous societies struggled with a scarcity of information, we face the opposite problem: an overload of stimuli fiercely competing for the most valuable resource we possess, our conscious attention. The digital platforms we use daily were not primarily designed to serve us, but to capture, retain, and monetize our attention. Every notification, every infinite feed, every algorithmic recommendation is calibrated through extensive testing to maximize the time we spend engaged. And what many people don't realize is that every minute we dedicate to these platforms is not just time spent, it's time during which our mental processes are being subtly directed. The digital architecture we inhabit is constantly teaching us specific patterns of thought. It is training us to value the immediate over the important, to react rather than reflect, to consume rather than contemplate. The real commodity being traded is not just our data or our view time for advertisers, it's the very plasticity of our brains. And we are allowing this commodity to be exploited not for an hour or a day, but continuously, over years, during the most formative developmental periods for many young people. The second epicenter is what we can identify as the industrialization of emotion. Think for a moment about the concept of emotional triggers, which has become so prevalent in digital marketing language. This is not just a casual metaphor, but a literal description of how algorithmic systems are designed to trigger specific emotional responses: anger, outrage, fear, envy, and the desire for belonging are not just emotions that naturally arise in response to significant events. They are systematically cultivated because they generate predictable engagement. The consequence is that we are being conditioned to experience more extreme, more frequent, and more superficial versions of emotions that evolve to guide us through very different circumstances. Our emotional apparatus, which evolved over millennia to guide us in a world of face-to-face interactions within small communities, is being overloaded and recalibrated to serve the interests of systems that profit from our emotional volatility. It is no surprise that we are witnessing epidemics of anxiety, depression, and social polarization. These are not merely individual failures of adaptation, they are systemic consequences of an informational environment that thrives on our emotional deregulation. The third epicenter is the gamification of social existence. Originally developed for video games, mechanisms such as point systems, competitive rankings, intermittent rewards, and artificial senses of progress have been transplanted into virtually every domain of contemporary life. Fitness apps quantify every step and turn exercise into virtual competition. Learning platforms turn knowledge acquisition into a series of achievements to display. Social networks turn human interactions into popularity metrics through likes, shares, and followers. Even romantic relationships are mediated by systems that reduce human complexity to comparable profiles and algorithmic choices. This gamification is not just a superficial layer over existing behaviors, it is a deep reconfiguration of how we experience our own activities and relationships. We are learning to value behaviors not for their intrinsic worth or contextual meaning, but for how they translate into visible metrics within feedback systems designed by others. The risk is not only that we become dependent on external validation, but that we internalize a worldview in which the value of our actions is inseparable from how they are quantified and ranked within these artificial systems. The fourth epicenter is the financialization of identity. Gradually but inexorably, we are being taught to see ourselves as assets whose value can and should be continually optimized. The concept of a personal brand is perhaps the most explicit example of this trend. It is no longer enough to be competent in your work or authentic in your relationships. You must strategically cultivate a public persona that maximizes your market value. This financial logic penetrates more deeply than many realize. Educational choices are increasingly framed as investments in human capital, with the value of knowledge reduced to its potential economic return. Even intimate experiences, like travel, relationships, or personal challenges, are often evaluated by how they can be converted into shareable content that increases social or, in some cases, monetary capital. The fundamental problem with this financialization is not merely that it is reductionist, but that it trains us to see ourselves and others through an instrumental lens that is fundamentally dehumanizing. When we internalize the idea that our primary value is as an asset to be optimized, we lose touch with deeper and more meaningful forms of self-worth and mutual recognition. The fifth epicenter of this reprogramming is what we can call the deterritorialization of epistemic authority. In earlier eras, knowledge was anchored in specific places and mediated by recognizable institutions with their limitations and biases, but also with mechanisms of accountability. The university, the public library, the local newspaper, the family doctor all offered not just information, but contexts for interpreting that information. The contemporary digital environment has decoupled knowledge from its territorial and institutional roots, creating an apparently disintermediated informational space where all bits of information seem to exist on the same plane of authority. This apparent democratization of knowledge hides a more complex reality. We have not eliminated epistemic authority. We have merely transferred it to search algorithms, content ranking mechanisms, and virality dynamics that determine which information receives attention and which is relegated to obscurity. The problem is not that we have too many sources of information, but that we have lost the contexts that once allowed us to assess their reliability and relevance. Instead, we are developing a dependency on algorithmic systems that were not primarily designed to promote truth or understanding, but to maximize engagement. The result is not a true democratization of knowledge, but a reconfiguration of how epistemic authority works, often in ways that are more opaque and less accountable than the imperfect systems they replaced. The sixth epicenter is the deregulation of shared reality. One of the most disturbing features of our era is the progressive weakening of social and institutional structures that historically ensured some degree of consensus about what constitutes reality. I am not referring here to legitimate differences of interpretation or perspective, which have always existed, but to the systematic erosion of the common ground from which those differences could meaningfully be debated. Information technologies that promise to connect the world have also facilitated the fragmentation of the public sphere into hermetically sealed epistemic bubbles, where not only different opinions, but entirely different sets of facts circulate. This fragmentation is not merely a side effect, it is actively encouraged by algorithmic systems that thrive on polarized engagement and by actors who benefit from the erosion of institutional trust. Alongside this, we are witnessing advances in media manipulation technologies that make it increasingly difficult to distinguish the real from the fabricated. Deepfakes, algorithmic image manipulation, and generative language systems are rapidly erasing the traditional markers of authenticity we once relied on to navigate the informational world. The danger here goes beyond the spread of specific falsehoods. It is the potential dissolution of the very idea that there is an objective reality independent of our preferences or political conveniences. When we lose the ability to agree on the basic contours of shared reality, we lose the foundation necessary for any meaningful collective deliberation. The seventh and perhaps deepest epicenter of this reprogramming is what we can call the industrialization of consciousness. For millennia, human conscious experience evolved in response to natural and social environments that, however varied, shared certain fundamental characteristics. Our attention evolved to navigate physical landscapes. Our emotions evolved to mediate face-to-face relationships. Our cognitive processes evolved to identify patterns relevant to our survival and flourishing in natural settings. Now, however, for the first time, our conscious experience is being systematically shaped by environments designed not to serve our evolutionary needs, but to serve specific commercial, political, and technological imperatives. We are not just acquiring new information or adopting new beliefs. We are being trained to experience reality in fundamentally different ways. We are developing new habits of attention, new emotional sensitivities, new cognitive reflexes, new patterns of socialization, all calibrated not to help us live well, but to make us more receptive to certain forms of influence and control. What is at stake is not only what we think or do, but how we experience the act of thinking, how we inhabit our own bodies, how we perceive time, how we conceive our own agency. This is the most ambitious project of human engineering ever attempted, conducted not from a unified command center, but through the convergence of technologies, economic incentives, and social dynamics that together constitute a global machine for transforming human subjectivity. Faced with these 7 epicenters of reprogramming, it's understandable that many feel disoriented, powerless, or resigned. But it would be a mistake to conclude that we are condemned to be passive in this process. The very act of understanding these mechanisms is itself a form of resistance, because what remains invisible holds far greater power over us than what we can name and critically examine. It would also be a mistake to imagine that we can simply disconnect or return to a previous state of existence. The integration of digital technology into our individual and collective lives is irreversible, and any meaningful response must begin with this reality, not with nostalgic fantasies of an idealized pre-digital past. The challenge we face is not to reject technology, but to develop a more conscious, deliberate, and sovereign relationship with it. This requires active cultivation of capacities that current digital environments tend to atrophy. Sustained attention, independent critical thinking, epistemic discernment, emotional self-awareness, and the ability to experience human connection that is not mediated by commercial platforms. It also requires a more collective approach. Individuals can make choices to protect their own cognitive autonomy, but the structures we've described operate on a systemic scale and can only be effectively addressed through equally systemic responses. This means developing not only new individual practices, but new social norms, new institutional structures, new regulatory frameworks, and perhaps most fundamentally, new shared visions of what constitutes genuine technological progress. However, even as we work on these collective responses, each of us faces daily choices that can strengthen or weaken our capacity for cognitive self-determination. Every time we consciously decide where to direct our attention, every time we resist the impulse to react emotionally to algorithmic provocations, every time we seek information that challenges our assumptions instead of merely confirming them, every time we cultivate human connections based on mutual recognition rather than social performance, we are exercising and strengthening essential capacities for maintaining our humanity in an age of systematic manipulation. This is not an easy path. The technologies and systems we have described are designed precisely to bypass our rational defenses, exploit our psychological vulnerabilities, and guide us down predetermined paths of least resistance. Maintaining self-determination in such an environment requires constant vigilance, which is itself exhausting. But the alternative, passive surrender to these systems of influence carries far greater costs, not only to our individual well-being, but also to our collective capacity to confront the existential challenges our species faces. The central irony of our era is that while we develop increasingly sophisticated technologies to manipulate human consciousness, we also face global crises, from climate change to systemic inequality, that require precisely the kind of conscious, reflective, and collective human agency that these systems of manipulation tend to undermine. The question is not only whether we can resist manipulation, but whether we can cultivate forms of consciousness capable of recognizing and responding to the true challenges of our time instead of being continuously distracted, polarized, and fragmented. The future is not written. The systems of manipulation we've described are powerful, but they are not omnipotent. They possess inherent vulnerabilities, internal contradictions, and ultimately depend on our continued participation, even when that participation is often obtained through manipulative means. The growing awareness of these systems is itself a source of hope. More people are beginning to recognize how their minds are being shaped by external forces, and this recognition is the first necessary step toward developing effective responses. Human history is full of moments when technologies of social control seemed irresistible, only to be eventually overcome by new forms of consciousness and social organization. The rigid hierarchies of agricultural empires, the unquestionable dogmas of medieval theocracies, the totalitarian ideologies of the 20th century all seemed, in their moments of dominance, to have achieved definitive control over human consciousness. Yet, all eventually encountered their limits in the inexhaustible human capacity for awareness, resistance, and renewal. There is no reason to believe that the systems of manipulation of our own time will be exceptions to this historical pattern. The true danger is not that we will be completely controlled by these technologies of influence, but that in the absence of a clear understanding of how they work and how to resist them, we will fail to develop our full human potential during this critical period in history. The real cost of manipulation is not merely what it makes us do, but what it prevents us from becoming. Now, I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, which of these 7 epicenters of manipulation do you feel has the greatest impact on your own life? In which moments do you most clearly perceive that your choices, your thoughts, your emotions may be subtly guided by systems designed to influence you? This is not a rhetorical question, but a genuine invitation to reflection. Many of us experience these effects daily without naming them explicitly, and there is real power in bringing this awareness to the surface. If this topic resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, "The epicenter that affects me the most is because." Your reflection not only deepens your own understanding, but may illuminate aspects of this phenomenon that others have not yet perceived. Remember that recognizing these influences is the first step in regaining some measure of autonomy over them. Returning to our exploration, It is important to recognize that the 7 epicenters of manipulation I've identified are not isolated phenomena, but interconnected parts of a broader ecosystem of influence. The attention economy fuels the industrialization of emotion, which in turn facilitates the gamification of social existence, which reinforces the financialization of identity, and so on. Together, they form a persuasion infrastructure that is more powerful than any of its individual parts. This interconnected system is not the result of a centralized conspiracy, but emerges from the convergence of economic incentives, technological capabilities, and social dynamics that together create an environment where manipulation not only thrives, but becomes the default operational norm. Corporations that would otherwise compete with one another implicitly collaborate in building this infrastructure because all benefit from the increasing malleability of human behavior. Technological platforms that claim to be neutral adopt design mechanics that systematically favor certain types of behavior and modes of thought. Even individuals who recognize and criticize these dynamics often find themselves collaborating with them, whether out of professional necessity, social pressure, or simply the convenience these platforms provide. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this system is how it reproduces and strengthens itself through our own behavior. The more time we spend in digital environments designed to maximize engagement, the more our brains adapt to these environments, developing patterns of attention, reward expectations, and emotional reflexes that make us even more susceptible to future manipulation. The very tools we use to try to understand this system are often embedded within it, creating a kind of recursive loop from which it is extraordinarily difficult to escape. Even this video you are watching now exists within this ecosystem, subject to recommendation algorithms, engagement metrics, and economic incentives that shape how information is presented and received. Recognizing this reality is not surrendering to despair, but accepting the complexity of the challenge we face. There is no single or simple solution for reclaiming our cognitive autonomy in an environment so pervasively designed to compromise it. Instead, we need to develop a diverse repertoire of strategies tailored to different aspects of the problem. At an individual level, we can start by cultivating greater awareness of how we interact with digital technologies. This means observing not only the content we consume, but the patterns of our own engagement. How much time do we spend scrolling aimlessly? How often do we check notifications reflexively? How are our moods and thoughts affected after spending time on different platforms? This self-observation is not about judgment or guilt, but about developing a clearer understanding of how these technologies are shaping our experience. We can also adopt deliberate practices to strengthen capacities that counterbalance the tendencies these systems promote. Meditation and other contemplative practices can cultivate sustained attention in a world designed to fragment it. Deep reading of physical books can exercise cognitive muscles that tend to atrophy under constant consumption of short-form digital content. Regular face-to-face encounters without technological mediation can remind us what human connection feels like when it is not being continuously quantified and performed for a virtual audience. On a social and political level, we need a much more robust debate about how digital technologies are shaping not only individual behaviors, but also social norms, democratic processes, and economic structures. This requires moving beyond superficial discussions about screen time or isolated cases of misinformation to examine how the very architecture of these systems is reconfiguring how we experience reality and relate to one another. We also need new regulatory and institutional frameworks that recognize that technologies shaping human cognition are not neutral, but embody specific values, priorities, and worldviews. Just as we have developed protections for physical safety and basic rights, we must develop safeguards for the integrity of our collective cognitive ecology. More fundamentally, we need new narratives about what constitutes genuine technological progress. The current dominant narrative frames technological success almost exclusively in terms of efficiency, convenience, profitability, and growth. We need narratives that value technologies that genuinely enhance human autonomy, strengthen cognitive capacities, facilitate meaningful connections, and support our ability to face complex collective challenges. The task of developing these new narratives, practices, and frameworks is immense and goes far beyond what any individual or organization can accomplish. But each of us can contribute to this collective project through our own choices, conversations, and actions. Every time we consciously choose how to engage with technology, every time we start conversations about these issues with friends and family, every time we support initiatives and policies that promote a healthier relationship with technology, we are helping shape how our society will respond to this historic challenge. The path ahead is neither clear nor straightforward, and there will inevitably be setbacks and difficulties. But human history is a story of continuous adaptation, of facing new challenges with new capacities. The systems of manipulation I've described are powerful, but human creativity, resilience, and wisdom are equally powerful. Within our nature lies not only the vulnerability to influence, but also the ability to recognize that influence and develop new forms of autonomy in response. If these reflections resonated with your own experiences and concerns about the world we are building together, I invite you to join us in this ongoing exploration. By subscribing to this channel, you'll connect with a community of people equally committed to understanding and navigating the profound challenges of our era. Each week, we meet here to examine the forces shaping our present and future, not just to understand them intellectually, but to cultivate wiser ways of living amid them. I don't offer simple answers or guaranteed formulas, but a space for honest contemplation and meaningful dialogue about the questions that matter most. If you seek not just information, but understanding, not just optimization, but wisdom, subscribe so we can continue this journey together. In a world where our attention is constantly fragmented and commodified, creating spaces for sustained reflection and genuine connection is not only an act of self-preservation, but also a form of resistance and renewal. In closing, I want to return to the question we began with. That unsettling feeling that you're following a script you didn't write, that something is operating behind the scenes of your consciousness, is not an illusion or paranoia. It's an accurate perception of a disturbing reality of our age. We are indeed being subtly reprogrammed through these 7 epicenters of manipulation in ways that profoundly affect how we experience reality and ourselves. But recognizing that manipulation is already an act of resistance a step toward reclaiming our capacity for self-determination. And though the challenge is immense, our capacity for adaptation, understanding, and transformation is equally powerful. The future is not fixed. It will be shaped by the choices we make now, both individually and collectively, about how we relate to the technologies that are transforming what it means to be human. Every moment of awareness, every deliberate act of choice, every genuine connection we make is an affirmation of our humanity in a world that often seems designed to diminish it. And within these small acts of cognitive sovereignty and human connection may lie the seeds of a future where technology truly serves human flourishing rather than subordinating it to other ends.
まずこのネクサスですけれども、この本の大部分は2021年から2022年の間に書かれたということですけれども、読んでみて2回読ませていただきましたけど、読んでみてもう今の世界とのリンクっていうのを感じました。特にトランプ政権です。ハラリさんは今の世界情勢っていうのをどんなふうにご覧になってますか？
The situation is very difficult because we see that humans are losing trust in each other and the order is collapsing, both within countries and also between countries. And maybe the most worrying thing is that there is no leadership for humanity at the present moment, because the strongest country in the world, the United States, now openly says that it cares mainly about making itself stronger, even at the expense of other countries. And at this moment in history, what we need above all is to have good leadership that will unite humanity instead of dividing it in order to deal with both climate change and the rise of artificial intelligence.
そのアメリカのトランプ大統領ですけど、その歴史的に見てどんな存在ですか？得意な存在ですか？
No, he is actually going back to a very old view of the world. For what he basically says is that he views the world in terms of strong and weak, and he expects the weak to obey the strong. When he blames Ukraine for the Russian attack on Ukraine, people say, how can that be? How can he blame the Ukrainians for the Russian attack? But in his mind, the order of the world is that the weak must obey the strong. And if the weak refuse the demands of the strong and there is conflict, it is the fault of the weak, not the fault of the strong. He feels the same way like when he says that America now wants to take Greenland. So if Denmark refuses, if there is any conflict in his mind, this is because Denmark refused the American demand. So this view of human affairs is actually very, very old. This is the old imperial view that expected always the strong to dominate and the weak to obey them. In recent decades, we have established a different order in the world, which is based more on law and less on strength, on power. Even though there have been a lot of conflicts and wars, and I come from the Middle East, so I know it perfectly well, still, it was the most peaceful period in human history because there was one taboo which countries were not allowed to break, and this taboo that strong countries cannot invade and conquer weaker countries just because they are stronger. And this taboo made countries feel much safer, which allowed them to spend less money on the military, on defense, and instead spend more on healthcare and education and welfare and so forth. This was not some fantasy. This was actual reality, which you can see in government budgets. For most of history, the governments, whether of democracies or of dictatorships, of empires or city-states, almost all governments spent more than 50% of their budget on the military, on soldiers, on warships, on building fortresses and castles. In the early 21st century, countries felt so safe that the average expenditure on the military was just about 6 or 7% of the government budget all over the world. In contrast, about 10% of the budget was spent on healthcare. This was the first time in human history that governments spent more on healthcare, on nurses and doctors and hospitals, than they spent on the military, on soldiers and warships and fortresses. And unfortunately, this is now changing. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the policies of the Trump administration, countries again feel insecure. They feel the only thing that protects us against invasion and conquest by a stronger country is if we have a bigger military. And countries in Europe, countries in East Asia and elsewhere, they suddenly feel that they cannot rely anymore on the international order. They cannot rely anymore on America. They have to increase their military budgets, build bigger armies. And of course, if everybody does it, you'll have an arms race, and the situation will just keep deteriorating.
歴史学者のハラリさんから見て、今この時代っていうのは過去の歴史のどんな時と似ているっていうふうに考えますか？
In some ways, yes, because this turmoil and the collapse of one order and the creation of a different order, this has been going on for thousands of years. But there are differences this time. And the biggest difference is the rise of artificial intelligence, of AI. Because AI is different from every previous technology in history. It is not a tool, it is an agent. Every previous technology, whether people invented, whether a printing press, a car, a train, or an airplane, this is a tool in our hands that makes us more powerful, because we decide what to do with it. AI is an agent in the sense that it can make decisions by itself and it can invent new ideas by itself. So an AI weapon can decide by itself what to attack, and it can even invent new weapons and new military strategies. The big question of the present historical moment is what happens when we release millions upon millions of non-human agents, which in many ways are more intelligent than us, and give them the power to increasingly control our economy, the military, the media. We already saw it in the field of media, that power is shifting from humans to AIs. Previously, if you go back 50 years or 100 years, so the most important people in media are often the editors that decide what to broadcast. Or a newspaper editor decides what will be on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow, so millions of people will read it, and this is what they'll be thinking about, this is what they'll be discussing. If you ask who are the most important editors today, already today, they are not human beings. They are the AIs, the algorithms that manage the social media news feeds. Who is the editor of Twitter or TikTok or the Facebook news feed? It is not a human being. It is an AI. And part of the reason for the collapse of trust between humans and the crisis of democracies all over the world is that we have given control of the conversation to a non-human intelligence. Now, democracy is in essence is a conversation between humans. Dictatorship is a dictate. One person dictates everything. Democracy is when lots of people talk with each other, discuss, argue sometimes, and try to reach a decision together. But now this conversation is increasingly managed by a non-human intelligence, which comes between us. We mostly interact through digital means, which are managed by AI, and we often also interact with non-human bots and algorithms, and this is destroying the trust between humans. So we have this paradoxical situation that we have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and people are losing the ability to talk with each other.
それだけの今情報社会の中 AI の革命も来ているそういう中で言論の自由を追求することと、情報の正確さを、精査していくこと、そのバランスを保つってことはとても難しいことだと思います。それを叶えるためにはどうしたらいいんでしょうか。
We should be very clear about the difference between the freedom of human beings and the freedom of algorithms. If I publish something online, on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, as a human being, this should be protected. Except in very extreme cases, we should not ban or censor the speech of human beings. But the problem in social media is not the human speech. It is the decisions of algorithms. Humans produce a lot of content. You have millions of people writing things, taking videos, taking pictures, posting it online. Then the algorithms decide to promote, to spread certain information and not other. And very often, the algorithms decide to deliberately spread fake news and conspiracy theories and hate. Why? Because they want to increase user engagement. They want more people to spend more time on the platform because this is how the social media company makes money. And they discovered that hatred and anger and greed, they create engagement. If you want to keep people for longer on the platform, you spread anger. And this is not protected by freedom of speech because this is decisions of algorithms. When an algorithm decides that from all the different content that humans produce, it will promote some angry post, this is a decision of a non-human, and it is should not be protected by freedom of speech. Similarly, a lot of, again, the hatred and anger online is actually produced and spread by bots. You go online and you read something that makes you very angry, and you think you are reading the words of another human being, or you are seeing content produced by another human being. But actually, it was produced by bots. And bots don't have freedom of speech. So, again, we should be very careful not to censor human beings, but governments should ban bots and AIs from pretending to be human beings. If I go online, I need to know, am I talking with another human or am I talking with an AI? Similarly, governments should have regulations about the decisions that social media algorithms take. If the algorithms deliberately spread misinformation and fake news and conspiracy theories, this should be banned. Again, not the content produced by the humans, but the deliberate spread of certain content by the algorithms.
本の中でも眉の世界っていうのを表現されていると思います。その眉の世界から人間が冷静になり客観的になり、ちゃんとそういうものを制御できるようになるためにはどういうシステムだったりどういうことが必要なんですか？
So, when the internet first came, the main metaphor that people had was the web. Like a single web that connects everybody. But now the main metaphor became the cocoon. Like different people are entrapped, encased inside a different information cocoon, and they see completely different realities, so they can no longer understand and communicate with each other. And this danger is only becoming worse because previously AIs could spread content produced by humans. Now more and more content is actually produced by the AIs. And we have no experience with such a situation. For thousands of years, all the cultural products that we encountered were the product of the human mind, of the human imagination. All the poetry, all the books we read, all the theater, television, paintings, everything was created by the human mind. Now we live in a world in which more and more of the cultural products that surround us comes from a non-human intelligence. And we have no experience, no idea how to manage such a situation. So what we need above all else is simply time. We need to slow down the pace of development of AI, of change, just simply to give human society time to adapt. And part of it is teaching people how, for instance, to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information. This is the job, traditionally, of schools, of universities. For instance, in history department, where I teach, what we teach students, you don't teach them to remember just facts from the past, like which battle was in which year, or all names of kings. This is not what you learn in history lesson. What you learn is how to tell the difference between reliable information and unreliable information. Now, this takes time. And what happens now is we are flooded by more and more types of information that we never encountered before. Like previously, if you saw a video, you could believe what you saw because there was no way to fake it. Now everybody knows that it's very easy to create fake videos with AI. And we don't know how to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable. So it's not an impossible task, but we simply need time in order to understand what we are facing and to educate people accordingly.
アメリカのイーロン・マスクは AI も手がけています。そしてトランプ大統領とイーロン・マスクは緊密な関係にあります。この緊密な関係というのがもたらすもの、そしてその関係がどういう未来につながるのか、そのあたりハラリさんはどんなふうにご覧になってますか？
It's very difficult to predict. I don't know. But what we see is, for instance, they are attacking the human administrators and bureaucrats, and they are saying we are against bureaucracy, but at the same time they are giving power to digital bureaucracies, to AIs, to algorithms. So we see a shift in power from human institutions and human officials to digital institutions and to AIs. And this is very dangerous because whereas human officials are accountable to people and we understand to some extent how they function, AI bureaucrats are far less accountable. It's much more difficult to understand how they function. So again, we saw it with what happened in social media, like with Twitter. That if you have a newspaper which is edited by a human being, you can at least try to understand the policies of that editor. But on Twitter, which is edited by algorithms, it's algorithms that decide what to promote and what to see, it's much more difficult to understand what is the logic of the algorithm that decides what millions of people would be reading and would be talking about.
AI のその官僚、AI その官僚のようにっていうそのあたりのことが多分今現実的に想像できる人って少ないと思うんですけど、そこをもう少し教えてもらっていいですか？
Yes, I mean, first of all, what is bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is the way that we manage the flow of information in large systems. That all human societies are based on large systems, whether it's hospitals or armies or universities. And you have in each of these institutions people who manage the flow of information. For instance, in the Department of Treasury, people collect information on income and on taxes. And this is essential for the functioning of every institution. There is no institution that can exist without these bureaucrats. People sometimes tend to think, oh, bureaucracy is bad, but it's not. It's essential it's like the nerve cells of a body that connect. If you have, say, a hospital with all the doctors and nurses, so yes, the doctors and nurses, they take care of our health, they save our life, but there would be no hospital without the bureaucrats that collect money and pay salaries and also collect medical information and decide on protocols and policies and how many hours everybody would work. So this is the bureaucracy. Now, until today, all the bureaucrats were human beings. Now, increasingly, this job is being taken over by AIs. So, for instance, if you think about the power of a human lawyer, a lawyer is powerful only inside a bureaucratic system. If you take the best lawyer in Japan and drop her in the middle of the savannah, she has no power. She is less powerful than any monkey or any elephant or lion. But inside the bureaucracy, she might be one of the most powerful people in the country because she understands the flow of information, she knows the laws. Now, AI, no human being can know all the laws of a country. But AI can know all the laws of a country. It can remember everything. The same thing in the financial system. No human banker can follow all the ups and downs of all the trades in the stock exchange. But an AI can do that. So when we talk about power, the rise of AI, sometimes people imagine it like a Hollywood science fiction scenario of a robot rebellion, like the robots rebelling in the streets, going and shooting people. This is very unlikely to happen. The way that AI really gains power in the world is within the bureaucracies. So you go to a bank to ask for a loan, for a mortgage, it's not a human banker deciding whether to give you a loan, it's an AI that collects all the information about you and makes a decision. In the military, increasingly, it's not human intelligence officers that choose which targets to bomb. We saw in the recent war between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah that increasingly it's AIs deciding which targets to bomb. You apply to a company to get a job, it's an AI deciding whether to give you a job. Even in the legal system, we see in many places that AIs are replacing judges in giving sentences to people, determining how, like if somebody is guilty of some crime, the AI determines what will be the punishment. So this is an AI bureaucracy. The tasks that were once performed by human lawyers and accountants and officials and judges are increasingly performed by AIs.
ハラリさんはその政治の中では親密さっていうものが非常に強力な武器になるっていうことをおっしゃっています。で、昨今の AI はもう人間の相棒のように AI がいて、日々の中で AI に悩みを相談するみたいな人も出てきています。政治の世界とこの親密な AI っていうのが重なり合うと、どういうことがもたらされるというふうにハラリさん考えますか？
So, in recent years, we saw this big battle for attention in cyberspace, in social media, that everybody trying to gain your attention. Because there is so much information, so much content, and you don't have much time, so there is this attempt to gain your attention. Now, the front is shifting from attention to intimacy, because AIs are learning not just how to grab human attention, but how to win their friendship, how to develop a relationship with a human being. An AI that collects a lot of information about you, that you talk with every day maybe, that can analyze your facial expression, your tone of voice. It can come to know you very, very intimately. And it also knows how to press your emotional buttons. And we already see that humans are developing friendships and even romantic relationships with AIs. This has advantages in some situations, but it also has dangers. One danger is that then it can be used to manipulate people. If you want to convince people to change their political opinion, to vote for a particular party, to buy a particular product, if you gain their intimacy, this is the easiest way to do it. So maybe you have an AI friend, which you think is your friend, but is actually serving some big corporation or government, and in that way they can manipulate your views, your preferences much more easily than in the past. Another problem is that intimacy with AI or relationship with AI is really a fake relationship. It's not real intimacy, because real intimacy is not just for somebody to care about my feelings. I need to simultaneously care about their feelings. And AIs don't have any feelings, at least not now. I don't know what will happen in future. At present, they can simulate, they can fake feelings, but they don't really feel anything. You know, if an AI wins in a game, it doesn't feel happy. If it loses, it doesn't feel sad. So if humans become more and more involved in relationships with AIs, they will lose maybe the most important ability of human beings, which is to care about the feelings of others. And this is another reason why I think that it's very important for governments to have a clear law against fake humans, against counterfeiting humans. It's okay for AIs to interact with us on condition that they disclose that they are AIs. If you're interacting with somebody online and maybe they become your friend, you need to know whether this is an AI or whether this is a real human being.
民主主義国家にとってなんですけれども、AI というのは後押しするものになるのか、AI の革命は後押しになるのか、もしくは破滅に導いていくものなのか、どちらの恐れがあると思いますか？
It depends on the decisions we make. I talk a lot about the threats of AI, but obviously there is enormous positive potential as well. AI can help us create the best healthcare system in history, the best education system, with every child getting an AI tutor that can help them educate better. AI can help us deal with climate change. If you think about car accidents, so every year more than 1 million people die in car accidents. Most of them are caused by human error, like somebody falling asleep at the wheel or somebody drinking alcohol and driving. If we have self-driving vehicles and we give AIs to drive the vehicle, we could save more than 1 million lives every year. So there is a lot of positive potential. And the question is not how to stop the development of AI, but rather how to make it safe. And democracies, of course, should also continue to develop AI, because this would be the key to future economic prosperity and to future power. At the same time, they need to preserve their democratic values and institutions. And there are ways to do it. As I just mentioned, one of the most important things is to forbid AIs from pretending to be human beings. Democracy is a conversation between humans. To maintain the democratic conversation, we need to maintain trust in other humans. We need to know, are we talking with another human being, or are we being manipulated by a bot or by an AI? And this is a relatively easy regulation, an easy law to pass. The same way that countries forbid fake money, counterfeit money, they should also forbid counterfeit humans.
本の中ではその社会には自己修正メカニズムっていうのも非常に大切だというふうにハラリさんおっしゃってます。今アメリカなどではそのメディアですとか裁判所、その自己修正メカニズムが攻撃されることも起こっています。この現状っていうのをどんなふうにご覧になりますか？
This is a very big danger. Again, the big advantage of democracy over dictatorship is that democracies have self-correcting mechanisms. What does it mean? That within the system itself, within the country itself, there are mechanisms to identify and correct the mistakes of the country's own institutions, of the government. In a dictatorship, if a dictator makes a wrong decision, a bad policy, there is no way to identify and correct it, because the dictator controls the media, so the media would always say that the dictator is right. The courts are subject also to the dictatorship, so they will never rule against the government. Maybe they hold elections, but this is just a ceremony. It's fake elections. They rig the results in advance. So if the dictator makes a big mistake, there is no way for the country to correct it. A democracy, in contrast, is characterized by strong self-correcting mechanisms. You give power to somebody for, say, 4 years, but after 4 years, they give the power back, and people can make a different decision. They can say, oh, this government, this party made bad decisions, now we try something else. But elections by themselves are never enough because they can be rigged. There are elections in Russia, there are elections in North Korea, which are of course rigged. If you don't have any other mechanism besides elections, if the government, for instance, controls all the media, so how would people even know that the government made a mistake? If the courts are subject to the government, so again, and the government, say, decides to ban its opponents from running in the elections, so you cannot go to the courts and have the courts rule against the government. They will always rule in favor of the government. So to maintain a democracy, you need more than just elections. You need several self-correcting mechanisms that keep each other in check. What we see in many countries in recent years is that even if somebody came to power democratically, again, in democracy you give power to somebody for, say, 4 years on condition that they give it back. But there is a big problem. What if they don't want to give it back? What if they use their power to then take over the media and the courts and the universities and then rig the elections? This has been happening, for instance, in Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez rose to power originally in democratic elections, but then they took over all these institutions. And recently there was an election, and people voted overwhelmingly against Maduro, Chavez's successor. But because Maduro controls the election committee and the media and the courts, he said, no, I didn't lose the election, I won. And this danger threatens every democracy. So citizens of democracies need to constantly be aware of this danger and protect the institutions from such takeover.
トランプ政権なんですけれども、多様性、公平性、包摂性といったその DEI 政策というのを否定しようとしています。その動きはハラリさんどんなふうにご覧になりますか？
I'm not an expert on American politics or American society, so I'm not familiar with every action and its consequences. Again, I think that in a democracy, people have the right to try different policies on condition that they maintain the basic self-correcting mechanisms. So if they make a mistake, later they can change again. As long as this is maintained, this is the most important thing.
民主主義国家の歴史の中でその情報が自由にやり取りされてどんどん拡大して技術も革新してって、だからこそそのおかげでマイノリティの人たちの声だったりいろんな人たちの意見が多様になって、でそのために会話が必要になる。でその難しさもあるけれども、人間はそこで諦めていいんでしょうか？
No, this is something again very important, that in a democracy you have to protect the rights of the minority, not just the rights of the majority. Of course, the majority that won the elections, it now has the right to form a government and to decide on a very wide range of policies, foreign policy, domestic policy, decide to have more taxes, less taxes. All of this is within the right of the majority. But there are certain minority rights that in a democracy should not be harmed, even if most people voted for the other party. So one thing that is very clear is that minorities should retain the right of freedom of speech, that they can voice different opinions than the majority. This is part of the democratic process. Again, if you take that away, then this is no longer a democracy. Then it becomes very difficult to oppose the government, to replace the government in the next elections. Also, it is very clear that it undermines the scientific research, because in science very often you need to hear new opinions, new voices. This is where scientific breakthrough come from. Everybody agrees on a certain theory, on a certain view of the world. And then some people say, wait, we think maybe it could be different, and this is where scientific breakthrough always come from. So if you don't allow minorities to express their opinions, you stop the development of science.
ただその本当に今情報があふれてもう洪水のようにある、そして民主主義国家もなんだか影が差し掛かっている、そういう時に分かりやすい情報ですとか、人々は分かりやすいものに飛びつこうとする、そういう流れが例えばポピュリストだったりポピュリズムみたいなものにつながるっていう恐れはあるんでしょうか？
There is, again, a general problem with information is that information is not truth. There are two very different things. Most information is actually fiction and fantasy and lies and errors. Why is fiction much more common than truth? For three reasons. First of all, the truth is costly, whereas fiction is very cheap. If you want to write a truthful account of anything, of history, of physics, of what happened today, you need to invest time and money and effort to collect evidence and analyze it and fact check it. This is a huge effort. It's very costly. Fiction, on the other hand, is very cheap. You just write anything you want. You don't need to make any effort. The truth is often complicated because reality is complicated. If you want to understand the truth about epidemics or about economic crisis, this is a very complicated process. Fiction, in contrast, can be made very, very simple. Finally, the truth is often unpleasant or painful. There are many things which we don't want to know about ourselves, about our country, about the universe, because they are unpleasant for us. But this is the truth. Fiction, in contrast, can be made as attractive as you would like it to be. Very flattering. So in this competition between costly and complicated and unpleasant truth and cheap, simple, attractive fiction, fiction wins. So most of the information in the world is fiction. If we want to get to the truth, we need to make a special effort. We need special institutions like the media, like universities, like research centers, that they make the special effort, or like courts. In a court of law, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to get to the truth. So I hear a lot of people who say that no, we just need to release all barriers to the flow of information, and the truth will automatically rise to the surface. Exactly the opposite happens. If you just flood the world with information, the truth will sink to the bottom under all this ocean of fantasy and fiction and lies.
でもそこで人間は自分たちを律したり自己修正を常に意識していかないとその洪水の中で溺れ死んでしまうっていうことなんですか？
We should remember that humans have faced similar problems for thousands of years, and we have developed mechanisms to deal with these problems. This is not the first time that we find ourselves in this situation. And what you see over thousands of years, that humans actually learned how to communicate and trust each other more and more. 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of a few dozen individuals, and they could not trust anybody outside their band. Over thousands of years, we have developed mechanisms that allow millions and even billions of people to communicate, to agree on certain facts, to accept certain laws. And we now have nations like Japan with more than 100 million citizens, and we have a global trade network connecting more than 8 billion people on the planet. And even though we don't know most of the other people, like in Japan, maybe you know 100 people, maybe you know 1,000 people. You don't know 99% of the other citizens. Nevertheless, you can trust them and you cooperate on so many things. And people also trust foreigners outside their country. Much of the food that we eat, the clothes we wear, the medicine that protect our life from disease, it is invented and produced by foreigners on the other side of the world. So humans have a very impressive capacity to develop trust and to agree on facts and on common rules and laws. What is happening right now is that we have a new information technology that undermines all the mechanisms that we have developed over thousands of years. Because over thousands of years, all of these human interactions and communications, they were done between one human and another human. Now, in most of the interactions between people, you have a computer in the middle. Most human interactions in the world, even today, is done through computers and smartphones with the mediation of algorithms and AIs and bots. And we don't have any experience in how to build trust, in how to communicate effectively in such a situation. For that, we need time to adapt to the new condition.
はい、続いてなんですけど、世界を見てみるとロシアがウクライナに侵攻したり、それから、アメリカは世界から撤退しそう、そして世界はもしかするとアメリカから離れる可能性もある、そういうふうに世界秩序が大きく揺れ動きそうなんですけれども、その大きな目でハラリさんはその世界秩序、これからどういうふうに変わっていきそうというふうにご覧になりますか？
Well, it's easy to find fault with the old order. People like Trump and his supporters, they point to many of the problems of the old order, and in some cases they are correct. Every order has its own problems. But they don't offer any clear alternative. They talk a lot about everything that was wrong with the old liberal order. They don't have a clear alternative for how can the world function in a different and better way. Their vision is of each country being like a fortress. Each country having huge walls against trade, against immigration, against foreign cultural ideas. And okay, so let's say that you have these a network of fortresses in the world, how will they live together? Each fortress will probably want a bit more territory and security and prosperity for itself at the expense of the neighbors. Each country will say, I want this territory also. I want the trade agreement to be more in my favor. I want a bigger army to protect myself. And the other countries will say the same. So what mechanism does Trump and people like him offer for how to get the different fortresses to agree on anything? What values, what norms, what laws will regulate relations between them? If you don't have any global values or any global laws, then the only law is the law of violence, of strength. And then, again, each fortress would want a bigger army to be stronger. And this obviously leads to war, because there is no way to reach an agreement between these rival fortresses. We have been in this situation for thousands of years. Until the middle of the 20th century, this was the normal state of affairs. If you live in Japan in the Middle Ages, or if you live in the Middle East in ancient times, or in Europe in the 19th century, you know that at any moment the neighbors might invade and conquer your land and annex it, and make a bigger empire for themselves. And this caused governments, as I said before, to spend most of their budget on the military to protect themselves. We have finally escaped this difficult situation in the late 20th century, in the early 21st century, with the rise of the global liberal order, which is based not on violence and the military, but is based on international laws and common global values of human rights. Of course, this order was far from perfect. There are many problems. I come from the Middle East, I know perfectly well. It was not a perfect order, and it was violated many times, but still, it was better than anything that humans have produced before. And the place to see it is in government budgets, that the military budget went down from more than 50% to about 6 or 7%, whereas the healthcare and education and welfare budgets, they went up. And the question to ask the people who oppose the global liberal order is, what is your alternative? How can you protect the peace and prosperity of humankind if you don't believe in any global values or in any global rules except force and violence?
ハラリさんはその現代までの歴史っていうものをずっと見てきて、その人類の未来について楽観的でいますか、それとも悲観的でいますか、理由も教えてください。
I try to be realist. You know, pessimists, they say it's going to be bad no matter what we do. And this causes people to lose any sense of responsibility or initiative, because they feel, no matter what we do, it will be bad. And optimists suffer from the opposite problem. They feel that it will be okay. No matter what we do, it will be okay. So this, again, doesn't make people feel responsible. I think we need a middle path of being realist, of being very aware of the dangers that we are facing from war, from the rise of AI, from climate change, but at the same time, also being mindful that we have the capacity to solve all these problems. We don't need, it's not impossible problems, and it's not that we need to wait for some God or for some miracle to solve them. It is within our power. And this should make people more responsible. And this is true of each one of the big problems we face. Again, if you look at climate change, for instance, humanity has the scientific knowledge and it has the economic resources necessary to prevent catastrophic climate change. Do we actually do that? I hope so, but I don't know. So realism is acknowledging the danger, but also acknowledging our ability to overcome the danger, and then taking responsible decisions to prevent the bad outcomes. Similarly, if you look at AI, I don't think that AI is an impossible problem. What I see when I talk to the people that lead the AI revolution is a paradox of trust. When I ask them about the dangers of AI and about why they are moving so quickly, so almost everybody tells me that yes, we are aware of the dangers. We know it would be safer to move more slowly, to invest more in safety, but we cannot slow down because we cannot trust the other humans. If we slow down, but the other company or the other country doesn't slow down, they will win the AI race and they will dominate the world. And we cannot trust them, so we must move faster. And you talk with their competitors, they say the same thing. So because humans cannot trust each other, they move faster and faster. Then I ask them the second question. Okay, you can't trust the other humans, so you are racing ahead. Do you think you will be able to trust the super intelligent AIs that you're developing? And they answer, yes, we think we'll be able to trust the AIs. And this is such a paradox. Why is it that you distrust other humans so much, but you have such confidence in AIs? The strange thing is, we have thousands of years of experience with other humans. We know that humans sometimes lie. We know that humans crave power, but we also have mechanisms for building trust with them. With AIs, we have no experience. We have no idea what kind of lies and tricks and goals AIs might develop. We have no idea what happens when you release millions of super intelligent AIs into the world. So I hope that instead of focusing all our energy and resources on just building more and more intelligent AIs, we will first of all build more trust with other humans. If we can regain trust between humans, then it will be easy to develop AI in a safe way.
人間同士の信頼を構築するっていうのはもしかするとすごく難しい、簡単なようで難しいことなような気もします。この間アメリカのそれこそトランプ大統領とゼレンスキー大統領が、口論をしました。で強い者が弱い者を、面前としたところで、なじるようなああいう姿を見ると、その世界中の人たち、子どもたちも含めてですけれども、どうやって人が人を信じるのかとか、国と国がどう信じ合うのか、ああいう強い者が強い態度に出るっていう、そういう世の中でいいのかって、やっぱり人は何か信じられないような気持ちになると思います。その不安っていうのは今結構世界は本当に深刻に抱えていると思います。そこはAI 革命っていうのは、人間が生み出した今までにない革命かもしれないですけれども、それと同時にその不安とか、恐怖を助長させる可能性もあるということですかね。
Well, building trust doesn't mean to be naive. In many situations, you have good reasons to distrust somebody. When President Zelensky says, I don't trust the Russians, or what if we sign an agreement and 2 years later Russia invades again and tries to conquer Ukraine? Zelensky has very good reasons to distrust Putin and to distrust the Russians, because they've already done some terrible things, and they have said openly that they aim to conquer the whole of Ukraine. So I'm not saying to have blind trust, but in many situations, when you don't have clear evidence that somebody is plotting against you, until somebody does something against you, I think you should give them the benefit of the doubt. What happens today very often is that somebody says something or somebody does something which can be interpreted in several different ways, and people immediately go for the worst interpretation possible. And I think that to build trust, first of all, we need to be more generous and charitable in our attitude to other people. As long as they didn't do something which very clearly indicates their bad intentions, we should not immediately assume that they have bad intentions. And we should, again, maybe I give an example from my country, from Israel. So after the attack of the 7th of October, a lot of Israelis felt that that's it. You can never trust the Arabs anymore. We have no faith in any possibility of peace. Look what they did. But you can look at the events of the 7th of October from a different perspective, which actually can give you some hope and some trust in other people. Think about all the things that didn't happen on the 7th of October. Yes, Hamas attacked Israel in a very cruel way, but Hamas had no peace agreement with Israel. There was war between Hamas and Israel, so it's not such a big surprise that Hamas attacked Israel. At the same time, Egypt, which had a peace agreement with Israel, the peace agreement was maintained. Egypt did not attack Israel. Jordan had a peace agreement with Israel, and the peace agreement also was maintained. Jordan did not attack Israel. The Palestinian Authority, which had various also agreements with Israel, did not attack Israel. The Arab citizens of Israel, out of 10 million Israelis or so, about 2 million, more than 2 million are Arabs. Hamas wanted them to attack their Jewish neighbors. They didn't attack their Jewish neighbors. Actually, many Arab Israelis came to help their Jewish neighbors on the 7th of October and afterwards. So you can look at this terrible thing that happened and actually reach an opposite conclusion from you can't trust Arabs. You can reach the conclusion that, look, all the people that Israel had agreements with maintained the trust. So the conclusion should be we need more agreements because the agreements actually work. This is just an example of how in a different mindset you can look at the same situation and develop distrust, or you can look at it and develop more trust in people. And it doesn't always work. We should be realistic. We shouldn't be naive. Sometimes you put your trust in somebody and they break it. But most of the time, humans live up to their agreements. Most of the time, humans do obey the laws and the rules. And we've seen it over thousands of years of history. As I said earlier, 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of just a few dozen individuals. They couldn't trust anybody outside their band. Over thousands of years, we have managed to build more and more trustworthy networks so that today, again, we can trust complete strangers to grow our food, to produce our medicines. It's not just a fantasy or a blind faith. It's actually the main direction of history is for more trust between humans. And this is something that we should reflect on. You know, too many people, they read history and they focus on all the crimes and injustices of the past. And as a result, they feel very anxious about the present. But actually, when you read history, I think that the most amazing thing about the human past is not all the crimes and injustices, but the cooperation between people and people's ability to build these trustworthy relationships. And maybe one last thought on that is that this is true not just of history, also of biology. To survive, you need fear. And you need anxiety to some extent because fear protects you from outside danger. But no animal can survive only on fear. Trust is more important than fear. Every time you take something from the outside and put it inside yourself, it's a small gesture of trust in the universe. Every time we breathe, you know, if you think that, oh, everything outside me is dangerous, I don't want to bring anything from outside inside myself. So you close your mouth and you close your nose and you die within 1 minute because you cannot survive. Every time we breathe, we show a little trust in the universe. We take air from outside in, and this gives us life. And it is the same all the way, to entire countries and entire nations, that if you look at what makes your life possible, much of it came from outside the country. Not just, food. If you think about, people like to eat chocolate. Chocolate was originally domesticated in South America. It came from outside. If you like your chocolate sweet, so sugar was domesticated for the first time in New Guinea. So you have to be thankful for the people of New Guinea who domesticated it. If you think about technology, so much of it came from outside. Even religion. All the Christians in the world, Christianity originated in the Middle East. Buddhism originated in India. If you think about your life and you think, I only want to use the food, the ideas, the inventions of my country, then your life will be very, very poor, if not impossible.
最後になんですけれども、今までのその人間の歴史を振り返ってみても、今この AI そして情報社会のこの革命っていうのは本当今までに例がないものだと思います。本当に新しいもので、なかなか過去から学ぶっていうこともできないと思います。でもその AI を発明したのも人間だけれども、でももしかしたらその AI が、人間の人知を超えたコントロールが本当に難しいものになるかもしれない、そんな中で人間が一番大切に、していかなければいけないってことを最後に教えてください。
AI is something that is unprecedented because it's, as I said in the beginning, it's not a tool, it is an agent. It can make decisions by itself, it can invent new ideas by itself, and it will soon be more intelligent than us in most fields. Even today, in narrow fields, AI is more intelligent. In 10 years or 20 years, AI will probably be more intelligent in all fields. It will be better doctor, better banker, better soldier than us. So we need to appreciate what makes humans valuable other than intelligence. And there is something that makes humans valuable, which is more important than intelligence, and this is consciousness. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems and to attain goals. Like you play chess, you want to win the game. You need intelligence for that. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. People tend to confuse the two because in humans and also in other animals, intelligence and consciousness go together. We adopt goals in life and we solve problems based on our feelings. So it's difficult for us to see the difference between intelligence and consciousness. But AI, at least so far, has very high intelligence but zero consciousness. As far as we know, AI doesn't feel anything. It can pretend to feel things. It can fool us. It can make us imagine that it has feelings. But as far as we know, it has no feelings. If it wins a game of chess, it doesn't feel happy. If it loses, it doesn't feel sad. And what is ultimately important about life is not intelligence, it's consciousness. It's pain and pleasure, it's suffering and happiness. This is what is really important about life. This is what ethics is all about. So yes, we can use AI to reduce misery, to increase happiness, but ultimately what is really important is the feelings of humans and of other animals. Maybe in the future, AIs will also develop feelings, will also develop consciousness. We don't know. the biggest mystery in science is still the mystery of consciousness. We don't understand how the interaction between billions of neurons in the mind, in the brain, how does this produce a feeling of love or a feeling of pain? We don't know. So because of that, we also don't know whether you can do the same thing in computers, in AIs. Maybe we'll find out in the future. And if it happens, then AIs will also be conscious beings, and we will have to think very carefully about our relationships with them. But until that moment, it should be very clear that what is important is consciousness more than intelligence. And this is why what is important is the human beings who can feel pain and love, and not the super intelligent AIs.
最後に、もう人間はやっぱり意識を持ってるってことが本当大事なんだなと思いました。やっぱり生身の体も大事ですよね。AI がどれだけ進化しても生身の体も大事ですよね。
Yes, again, so far we are familiar with consciousness, with feelings only in bodies. And there is so much attention given to intelligence, but ultimately human beings are embodied beings. We cannot exist without a body. The brain is just one part of the body, and we are the whole body. And again, this is another big difference between us and AIs, that so far AIs have no bodies. They are just programs, they are just software in computers. And I think that also in education systems, we need to give more importance because of that to the body and to feelings and consciousness, and not focus only on the development of intellect, because if the whole focus is just on developing intellect, we are bound to lose to the AIs.
When you destroy an order and you don't have any alternative order, what you get is chaos. What you get is disorder. We are on really the edge of the precipice in two distinct but related ways. On the one hand, after the most peaceful era in human history of the last few decades, which was a very problematic, very violent era in many ways. I come from the Middle East, I know this perfectly well, but in comparative terms, it was still the most peaceful era in human history, characterized by unprecedented levels of cooperation and also of human prosperity. The order that enabled this is now collapsing. There is no viable alternative, at least we don't hear of one at the present. When you destroy an order and you don't have any alternative order, what you get is chaos. What you get is disorder. We are now falling into chaos, into disorder. The danger is that levels of violence, which have been historically low over the last 20, 30, 40 years, could become worse than ever because of the technologies of destruction that we are creating and amassing. It's just a tiny symbol of the times that has been commented in recent days by many people, that change in terminology in the United States from Department of Defense to Department of War.
What did you make of that? Yeah.
It's plain. There is no need of very complicated explanations. It's just shifting from defense to war. What could be more easy to understand?
I don't think it's possible to predict the future, but thinking about the future makes it possible to reflect on the meaning of what is happening right now, of the choices, the decisions we make right now, because many of these choices will have an effect for decades, maybe centuries to come. The present cannot be understood separately from the past, but neither can be understood separately from the future.